Explorer by Catherine Rundle. Like a man-made magic wish, the aeroplane began to rise. The boy sitting in the cockpit gripped his seat and held his breath as the plane climbed into the arms of the sky. Fred's jaw was set with concentration and his fingers twitched, following the movements of the pilot beside him. The aeroplane vibrated as it flew faster into the setting sun, following the swerve of the Amazon River below them. Fred could see the reflection of the six-seater plane, a spot of black on the vast sweep of blue, as it sped towards Manaus, the city on the water. He brushed his hair out of his eyes and pressed his forehead against the window. Behind Fred sat a girl and her little brother. They had the same slanted eyebrows and the same brown skin, the same long eyelashes. The girl had been shy, hugging her parents until the last possible moment at the airfield. Now she was staring down at the water, singing under her breath, her brother trying to eat his seatbelt. In the next row, on her own, sat a pale girl with blonde hair down to her waist. Her blouse had a neck ruffle that came up to her chin, and she kept tugging at it and grimacing. She was determinedly not looking out of the window. The airfield they had just left had been dusty and almost deserted, just a strip of tarmac under the ferocious Brazilian sun. Fred's cousin had insisted that he wear his school uniform and cricket jumper, and now, inside the hot, airless cabin, he felt like he was being gently cooked inside his own skin. The engine gave a whine and the pilot frowned and tapped the joystick. He was old and soldierly, with brisk nostril hair and a grey wax moustache, which seemed to reject the usual laws of gravity. He touched the throttle and the plane soared upwards, higher into the clouds. It was almost dark when Fred began to worry. The pilot began to belch, first quietly, then violently and repeatedly. His hand jerked and the plane dipped suddenly to the left. Someone screamed behind Fred. The plane lurched away from the river and over the canopy. The pilot grunted, gasped, and wound back the throttle, slowing the engine. He gave a cough that sounded like a choke. Fred stared at the man. He was turning the same shade of grey as his moustache. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked. "Is there something I can do?" Fighting for breath, the pilot shook his head. He reached over to the control panel and cut the engine. The roar ceased. The nose of the plane dipped downwards. The trees rose up. "What's happening?" asked the blonde girl sharply. "What's he doing? Make him stop!" The little boy in the back began to shriek. The pilot grasped Fred's wrist hard for a single moment, then his head slumped against the dashboard, and the sky, which had seconds before seemed so reliable, gave way.
Who are ya? Who are ya? Who are ya? Who's that behind the mask?
Miss Seeth's Detention Rampage. Miss Seeth's Detention Rampage. Some teachers are permanently annoyed. Others are always cross. There are even some who spend their whole day fuming. However, Miss Seeth was never not furious. There was a very good reason for this, and for once it wasn't the fault of the children. At Ryle High School, Miss Seeth had been a deputy head for as long as anyone could remember. For years and years, she'd been living in the shadow of someone who had the top job, someone who would never retire, someone who'd been headmistress for very nearly 50 years, 5 decades, half a century. It was unheard of to be in a job for so long. At some schools, a head teacher might only last 5 minutes. As our tale begins, the 99-year-old Miss Stint was just days away from celebrating her golden anniversary as headmistress of Ryle High. This made Seeth seethe. As deputy head, she was just under Miss Stint. Any deputy head dreams of one day becoming the head teacher. Number 1, top dog, the big cheese, numero uno, our glorious leader. But not for nearly 50 years. That is how long Miss Seeth had been waiting to seize the crown. Waiting and waiting and waiting, and then waiting some more. Every day she cursed the ground Miss Stint rolled on. One day, she would incant to herself as she looked around the school, one day this will be mine, mine, mine. The fury was written all over her face. Over time, her eyes had narrowed to become 2 inky black dots. Her mouth had curled into a permanent grimace. Her ears had begun to glow as red as the fires of hell. Her forehead had become as lined as an exercise book, and her nostrils had flared so much you could stuff a sausage roll up each one. Miss Seeth's face was permanently frozen in fury. She woke up in the morning like that, and she went to bed at night like that. Even when she was experiencing something pleasurable, like sucking one of her favourite boiled sweets, she looked as if she was sucking on a wasp.
Who are ya? Who are ya? Who are ya? Who's that behind the mask?
Julie, there's a cat in the library by Vicky Myron. Every night people left books in the return box of the library in the small town of Spencer, Iowa. Funny books, big books, truck books, pig books, they left them all. But one night, on the coldest night of the year, someone left a strange surprise, a tiny kitten. When Vicky, the librarian, found him the next morning, the kitten was cold and scared and very, very dirty. Vicky took one look and decided to give him a warm bath. The kitten went into the sink, brown and crying, but he came out orange and purring. I'm going to keep you, said Vicky, you already loved him. We'll name you Dewey, read more books. You can live here and be our library cat. But Dewey had no idea what it meant to be a library cat, so he did what kittens do all day. He played, he lounged on the newspaper, rode on the book trolley, and knocked pens to the floor, and he goofed around with Marty the mouse, snooped in every open drawer, and always found at least one rubber band. But what Julie loved most of all was people. Tall ones, round ones, quiet ones, loud ones. The little ones, however, surprised him, and not always in a good way. Look, Nathan, said his mummy, there's a cat in the library. Nathan bent down and said, hi, hooey-dooey, Ukes. No, said his sister Hannah, it's Dewey, read more books. Dewey squirmed. The boy was stroking him in the wrong direction. Dewey loved to be stroked, but he hated being stroked in the wrong direction. Dewey was licking his fur back into place when he heard a strange noise. Wah! Dewey's ears perked up. He looked around. Wah! Wah! Dewey sprang to action and spread really slowly towards the sand.
Who are ya? Who are ya? Who are ya? Who's that behind the mask?
10 little dinosaurs. 10 little dinosaurs hatching from their eggs, blinking in the sunshine, stretching out their legs. Look how Mummy's sleeping, let's go and explore. 10 little dinosaurs all say, roar. 10 little dinosaurs walking in a line. Stomp goes Diplodocus, now there are 9. 9 little dinosaurs think the world smells great. Slurp goes a hungry plant, now there are 8. 8 little dinosaurs peep inside a cavern. Grr, snarls a T-Rex, now there are 7. 7 little dinosaurs in a tricky fix. Cark, says a pterodactyl, now there are 6. 6 little dinosaurs need to duck and dive. Sploosh goes the bubbling springs, now there are 5.
Who are ya? Who are ya? Who are ya? Who's that behind the mask?
This is an extract from Michael Morpurgo's Kenzuki's Kingdom, and this bit is where Michael finds himself in the sea, having fallen overboard. Chapter 4, Gibbons and Ghosts. The terrors came fast, one upon another. The lights of the Peggy Sue went away into the dark of the night, leaving me alone in the ocean, alone with the certainty that they were already too far away, that my cries for help could not possibly be heard. I thought then of the sharks cruising the black water beneath me, scenting me, already searching me out, homing in on me, and I knew there could be no hope. I could be eaten alive. I would be eaten alive, either that or I would drown slowly. Nothing could save me. I trod water, frantically searching the impenetrable darkness about me for something, anything to swim towards. There was nothing. Then a sudden glimpse of white in the sea, the breaking of a wave perhaps, but there were no waves. Stella! It had to be! I was so thankful, so relieved not to be all alone. I called out and swam towards her. She would keep bobbing away from me, vanishing, reappearing, then vanishing again. She had seemed so near, but it took several minutes of hard swimming before I came close enough to reach out and touch her. Only then did I realise my mistake. Stella's head was mostly black, this was white. It was my football. I grabbed it and clung on, feeling the unexpected and wonderful buoyancy of it. I held on, treading water and calling for Stella. There was no answer. I called, but every time I opened my mouth now, the seawater washed in. I had to give her up. I had to save myself if I could. There was little point in wasting energy by trying to swim. After all, I had nowhere to swim to. Instead, I would simply float. I would cling to my football, tread water gently, and wait for the Peggy Sue to come back. Sooner or later, they had to discover I was overboard. Sooner or later, they would come looking for me. I mustn't kick too much, just enough to keep my chin above the water, no more. Too much movement would attract the sharks. Morning must come soon. I had to hang on till then. I had to. The water wasn't that cold. I had my football. I had a chance. I kept telling myself that over and over again, but the world stayed stubbornly black about me, and I could feel the water slowly chilling me to death. I tried singing to stop myself from shivering, to take my mind off the sharks. I sang every song I could remember, but after a while I'd forget the words. Always I came back to the only song I was sure I could finish, 10 Green Bottles. I sang it out loud again and again.
Who are ya? Who are ya? Who are ya? Who's that behind the mask?
Down in the valley there were 3 farmers. The owners of these farms had done well. They were rich men. They were also nasty men. All 3 of them were about as nasty and as mean as any men you could meet. Their names were Farmer Boggis, Farmer Bunce and Farmer Bean. Boggis was a chicken farmer. He kept thousands of chickens. He was enormously fat. This was because he ate 3 boiled chickens smothered with dumplings every day for breakfast, lunch and supper. Bunce was a duck and goose farmer. He kept thousands of ducks and geese. He was a kind of a pot-bellied dwarf. He was so short his chin would have been underwater in the shallow end of any swimming pool in the world. His food was donuts and goose livers. He mashed the livers into a disgusting paste and then stuffed the paste into the donuts. This diet gave him tummy ache and a beastly temper. Bean was a chicken and apple farmer. He kept thousands of chickens in an orchard full of apple trees. He never ate any food at all. Instead, he drank gallons of strong cider, which he made from the apples in of his orchard. He was as thin as a pencil and the cleverest of them all. Boggis and Bunce and Bean, one fat, one short, one lean. These horrible crooks, so different in looks, were none of the less equally mean. That is what the children round about used to sing when they saw them.
Who are ya? Who are ya? Who are ya? Who's that behind the mask?
I'm reading Roald Dahl, James and the Giant Peach from chapter 13. A few minutes later, Miss Spider had made the first bed. It was hanging from the ceiling, suspended by a rope of threads at the end, so that actually it looked more like a hammock than a bed. But it was a magnificent affair, and the stuff that it was made of shimmered like silk in the pale light. I do hope you'll find it comfortable, Miss Spider said to the old green grasshopper. I made it as soft and silky as I possibly could. I spun it with gossamer. That's a much better quality thread than the one I use for my own web. Thank you so much, my dear lady, the old green grasshopper said, and climbing into the hammock. This is just what I needed. Good night, everybody. Good night. Then Miss Spider spun the next hammock and the ladybird got in. After that she spun a long one for the centipede and an even longer one for the earthworm. And how do you like your bed? She said to James when it came to his turn. Hard or soft? I like it soft. Thank you very much, James answered. For goodness sake, stop staring around the room and get on with my boots, the centipede said. You and I are never going to get any sleep at this rate. And kindly line them up neatly in pairs as you take them off. Don't just throw them over your shoulder. James worked away frantically on the centipede's boots. Each one had laces that had to be untied and loosened before it could be pulled off. And to make matters worse, all the laces were tied up in the most terrible complicated knots that had to be unpicked with fingernails. It was just awful. It took about 2 hours. And by the time James had pulled off the last boot of wool and had lined them up in a row on the floor, 21 pairs altogether, the centipede was fast asleep. "Wake up, centipede," whispered James, giving him a gentle dig in the stomach. "It's time for bed." "Thank you, my dear child," the centipede said, opening his eyes. Then he got down off the sofa and ambled across the room and crawled into his hammock.
Who are ya? Who are ya? Who are ya? Who's that behind the mask?
I hope you haven't forgotten that while all of this was going on, I was still stuck behind the screen on my hands and knees with one eye glued to the crack. I don't know how long I had been there, but it seemed like forever. The worst part of it was not being allowed to cough or make a sound, and knowing that if I did, I was as good as dead. And all the way through, I was living in constant terror that one of the witches in the back row was going to get a whiff of my presence through those special nose holes of their ears. My only hope, as I saw it, was the fact that I hadn't washed for days. That and the never-ending excitement and clapping and shouting that was going on in the room. The witches were thinking of nothing except the Grand High Witch up there on the platform and her grand plan for wiping out all the children of England. They certainly weren't sniffing around for a child in the room. In their wildest dreams, if witches have dreams, that would never have occurred to any of them. I kept still and prayed. The Grand High Witch's dreadful gloating song was over now, and the audience was clapping and madly and shouting, "Brilliant! Sensational! Marvellous! You are a genius, oh brainy one! It is a thrilling invention, this delayed action mouse maker. It is a winner! And the beauty of it is that the teachers will be the one who bump off the stinking little children. It won't be us doing it. We shall never be caught."
Who are ya? Who are ya? Who are ya? Who's that behind the mask?
The Gruffalo. A mouse took a stroll through the deep dark wood. The fox saw the mouse and the mouse looked good. "Where are you going to, little brown mouse? Come and have lunch in the underground house." "Oh, it's terribly nice of you, fox, but no, I'm going to have lunch with a Gruffalo." "Gruffalo? What's a Gruffalo?" "Oh, why didn't you know? He has terrible tusks and terrible claws, terrible teeth in those terrible jaws." "Ooh! Where are you meeting him?" "Here, by these rocks. And his favourite food is roasted fox." "Oh, roasted fox? I'm off," Fox said. "Goodbye, little mouse." And away Fox fled.
Who are ya? Who are ya? Who are ya? Who's that behind the mask?
Charlie the Chocolate Factory, Chapter 12. What it said on the golden ticket. Charlie burst through the front door shouting, "Mother! Mother! Mother!" Mrs. Bucket was in the old grandparents' room serving them their evening soup. "Mother!" yelled Charlie, rushing in on them like a hurricane. "Look! I've got it! Look! Mother! Look! The last golden ticket! It's mine! I found some money in the street and I bought 2 bars of chocolate, and the second one had the golden ticket, and there were crowds of people all around me wanting to see it, and the shopkeeper rescued me, and I ran all the way home, and I'm here. I am. It's the 5th golden ticket! Mother, I found it!" Mrs. Bucket simply stood and stared, while the 4 old grandparents were sitting up in bed, balancing bowls of soup on their laps. All dropped their spoons with a clatter and froze against their pillows. For about 10 seconds there was absolute silence in the room. Nobody dared to speak or move. It was a magic moment. Then very softly, Grandpa Joe said, "You're pulling our legs, Charlie, aren't you? You're having a little joke." "I am not!" cried Charlie, rushing up to the bed and holding out the large and beautiful golden ticket for him to see. Grandpa Joe leaned forward and took a close look, his nose almost touching the ticket. The others watched him, waiting for the verdict. Then, very slowly, with a slow and marvellous grin spreading all over his face, Grandpa Joe lifted his head and looked straight at Charlie. The colour was rushing to his cheeks, and his eyes were wide open, shining with joy. and in the centre of each eye, right in the very centre, in the black pupil, a little sparkle of wild excitement was slowly dancing. Then the old man took a deep breath, and suddenly, with no warning whatsoever, an explosion seemed to take place inside him. He threw up his arms and yelled, "Yippee!" And at the same time, his long, bony body rose up out of bed, and his bowl of soup went flying into the face of Grandma Josephine, and in one fantastic leap, this old fellow of 96 and a half, who hadn't been out of bed these last 20 years, jumped onto the floor and started doing a dance of victory in his pyjamas. "Yippee!" he shouted. "3 cheers for Charlie! Hip, hip, hooray!" At this point, the door opened and Mr. Bucket walked into the room. He was cold and tired, and he looked it. All day long, he had been shoveling snow in the streets.
Who are ya? Who are ya? Who are ya? Who's that behind the mask?
Why She's Great by Kids Spot. I asked my friends what makes their mum great. They told me that she was their mate. They asked me why my mum's the best. I gave them this list and told them I'm blessed. Cooking dinner, cuddles and play. Singing, dancing, music all day. Driving, walking, riding a bike. Mum knows exactly what I like. Homework, reading, computer and fun. Endless weekends watching me run. Solving puddles, block towers that sway. Keeping me up every day. Friends come over and she cooks us treats. We get stuck into all of her sweets. Tucking me in with a book and a song, even though her day was so long. This is why, Mum, I have to say, a very big happy Mother's Day.
Who are ya? Who are ya? Who are ya? Who's that behind the mask?
Alice Through the Looking Glass, Chapter 6, Humpty Dumpty. However, the egg only got larger and larger and more human. When she had come within a few yards of it, she saw that it had eyes and a nose and mouth. And when she had come close to it, she clearly saw that it was Humpty Dumpty himself. "It can't be anybody else," she said to herself. "I'm as certain of it as if his name were written all over his face." It might have been written 100 times easily on that enormous face. Humpty Dumpty was sitting with his legs crossed like a Turk on the top of a high wall, such a narrow one that Alice quite wondered how he could keep his balance, and as his eyes were steadily fixed in the opposite direction and he didn't take the least notice of her, she thought he must be a stuffed figure after all. "And how exactly like an egg he is!" she said aloud, standing with her hands ready to catch him, for she was every moment expecting him to fall. "It's very provoking," Humpty Dumpty said after a long silence, looking away from Alice as he spoke. "To be called an egg, very." "I said you look like an egg, sir," Alice gently explained. "And some eggs are very pretty, you know," she added, hoping to turn her remark into a sort of compliment. "Some people," said Humpty Dumpty, looking away from her as usual, "have no more sense than a baby." Alice didn't know what to say to this. It wasn't at all like conversation, she thought, as he never said anything to her. In fact, his last remark was evidently addressed to a tree. So she stood and softly repeated to herself, "Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty in his place again. That last line is much too long for poetry," she added, almost out loud, forgetting that Humpty Dumpty would hear her. "Don't stand chattering to yourself like that," Humpty Dumpty said, looking at her for the first time. "But tell me your name and your business." "My name is Alice, but—" "It's a stupid name enough," Humpty Dumpty interrupted impatiently. "What does it mean?" "Must a name mean anything?" Alice asked doubtfully. "Of course it must," Humpty Dumpty said with a short laugh. "My name means the shape I am, and a good handsome shape it is too. With a name like yours, you might be any shape almost." "Why do you sit out here all alone?" said Alice, not wishing to begin an argument. "Why, because there's nobody with me," cried Humpty Dumpty. "Did you think I didn't know the answer to that? Ask another." "Don't you think you'd be safer down on the ground?" Alice went on, not with any idea of making another riddle, but simply in her good-natured anxiety for the queer creature. That wall is so very narrow. What tremendously easy riddles you ask, Humpty Dumpty growled out. Of course I don't think so. Why, if I ever did fall off, which there's no chance of, but if I did... Here he pursed up his lips and looked so solemn and grand that Alice could hardly help laughing. If I did fall, he went on, the king has promised me, you may turn pale if you like. You don't think I was going to say that, did you? The king has promised me, with his very own mouth, to send all his horses and all his men, Alice interrupted, rather unwisely.